Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took the mantle of Daredevil and protected Hell's Kitchen. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world ended in a symphony of agony. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was a maelstrom of emerald lightning and righteous fury, his entire being focused on a single, horrifying point, Tamura Shigaraki. The air tasted of ash and blood, a permanent miasma that had clung to the ruins of Jaka City for what felt like an eternity. The screams of his friends, the guttural roars of Nomu, the sickening, wet sound of decay consuming everything it touched, it was the soundtrack to the apocalypse. He could still feel the phantom weight of Bakugo's limp body in his arms, the memory of fresh, gaping wound in his soul. He had pushed one for all to its absolute limit, a sun-hot inferno raging under his skin. Black whip tendrils, thick as pythons, lashed out, tearing chunks of concrete from the ground. Fa gene was stored, a coiled spring of devastating power ready to be unleashed. Danger sense screamed, a constant, high-pitched wail in the back of his skull that had long since become background noise. He was hurt, bone-deep exhaustion warring with adrenaline, but he was still standing. He had to be. Shigaraki, a monstrous parody of a human being with a rictus grin, lunged. All for one, speaking through the boy he had twisted into a puppet, laughed a sound of pure malevolence. It's over, ninth. Simultaneously, a new player entered the fray. A villain with a desperate, terrified face, whose quirk was unknown, unleashed a wave of shimmering, violet energy. It wasn't aimed at Izuku, but at Shigaraki, a last-ditch effort to stop the unstoppable. But Shigaraki was too fast, sidestepping with unnatural grace. The wave of chaotic power, meant for the symbol of fear, washed directly over Izuku. For a single, silent heartbeat, everything stopped. The roaring inferno of One for All did not nullify the energy, it reacted to it. It was like pouring gasoline on a chemical fire. The violet light flared, consuming him. The connection he felt to his friends, to the very ground beneath his feet, snapped. The screaming symphony of the battlefield vanished, replaced by an absolute, deafening silence. He felt a sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled at a molecular level, 1,000 times per second. Then impact. The landing was a brutal, jarring punctuation mark to the silence. He hit something hard, felt a sickening crack in his ribs, and tumbled through what felt like a mountain of sodden, foul-smelling fabric before slamming into a wall of rough, cold brick. Pain was the first herald of his new reality. A sharp, piercing agony in his side, a dull throb in his head, and the familiar, searing burn of overused muscles. The second was the rain. It wasn't the clean, cleansing rain he knew. This was a grimy, acidic drizzle that plastered his torn costume to his skin and tasted of pollution. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. His vision swam. The vibrant green lightning of full cowling, which had been a second skin for so long, flickered around him like a dying candle flame before extinguishing completely, leaving him feeling naked and vulnerable. One for All was still there, a low ember in his core, but it was quiet. Subdued. He took a breath, and his lungs were assaulted by a new litany of smells. Not ash and blood, but rotting garbage, stale beer, urine, and the greasy scent of fried food. He was in an alley, a narrow, claustrophobic chasm between two towering brick buildings. A single, flickering bulb above a rusted metal door cast a sickly yellow glow on the scene. Graffiti, in a language he couldn't read, covered the walls and angry slashes of spray paint. An overflowing dumpster spewed its contents onto the wet asphalt. This wasn't Jaku. This wasn't Japan. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up his throat. He forced it down. He was a hero. He was the 9th holder of One for All. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed to assess. Asterisk costume. His Dekigama suit was in tatters. The armored plates on his arms were cracked, the fabric torn at the shoulder and thigh. One of his iron-soled boots was missing its entire front plate, revealing the worn red sneaker beneath. The cowl, his tribute to All Might, was ripped, one of its ears hanging limp. He was a wreck. Asterisk injuries. Multiple bruised, likely cracked ribs. A concussion, judging by the pounding in his skull. lacerations and contusions everywhere. Nothing life-threatening, thanks to the residual power of OFA reinforcing his body, but he was far from combat ready. Location, unknown. Utterly, completely unknown. The architecture was foreign, heavy and old, with intricate fire escapes zigzagging up the faces of the buildings. The distant wail of a siren was a different pitch, a mournful, two-toned cry that set his teeth on edge. He limped to the mouth of the alley, peering out. The street was a canyon of neon and shadows. Yellow vehicles, boxy and strange, crawled through the rain-slicked streets. The signs above the storefronts were in the same angular, unfamiliar script as the graffiti. A newspaper, plastered against a trash can by the rain, showed a picture of a man with blonde hair and a star on his chest. The headline was gibberish to him. He felt a profound, soul-crushing sense of isolation. He was adrift in an alien ocean, and his island, his entire world, had sunk beneath the waves. Uraraka. Ida. Todoroki. Kaken. All Might. Their faces flashed through his mind, and the despair he'd been holding at bay threatened to drown him. Were they safe? Did they win? Or did his disappearance cost them the fight? The thought was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He leaned against the cold brick, his breath fogging in the damp air, the weight of a billion what-ifs pressing down on him. He couldn't stay here. His costume, even in its ruined state, was a beacon. He needed to hide, to observe, to understand. He spotted a fire escape across the street. With a grunt of pain, he channeled a minuscule amount of OFA into his legs, barely 1%, and leaped. The distance was trivial, but the silence of his passage, the absence of the familiar green crackle of energy, was unnerving. He landed as softly as a cat on the cold metal, clinging to the shadows. From his perch 3 stories up, he watched the city breathe. It was a diseased, ragged breath. People hurried along the sidewalks, heads down, shoulders hunched against the rain, and something more, a palpable sense of weariness and fear that clung to the air like the humidity. This place felt wounded. That's when he saw it. In the mouth of another alley across the street, a scene as old as civilization was playing out. A man, thin and wearing a threadbare coat, was pinned against the wall by a larger, heavier figure. The larger man's voice was a low growl, a universal sound of intimidation. Izuku couldn't understand the words, but he saw the glint of a knife, the smaller man's frantic shaking of his head, the terror in his wide eyes. There was no thought. There was no hesitation. There was only instinct. The hero's soul, forged in the fires of UA High and tempered in the hell of the Paranormal Liberation War, took over. He didn't have a plan. He just moved. Pushing off the fire escape, he sailed across the street, a silent, ragged ghost. He aimed for the dumpster on the far side of the alley, landing on its lid with a muted thud. The mugger, startled, spun around, his eyes widening in shock at the sudden appearance of a figure in a tattered green costume. What the hell? The man started. Izuku didn't understand the words, but he understood the threat. He saw the knife turning towards him. He reacted as he'd been trained to for years. He dropped into a low stance, one arm forward, and focused. He didn't need much. Just enough. *1 for all, full cowling. 5%. Delaware smash. *. He flicked his middle finger. In his world, against a villain with a durability quirk, it would have been a stinging, non-lethal deterrent. A puff of air to create distance. Here, in a world without quirks, it was a cannon blast. The compressed air shot forward, not as a gentle puff, but as a visible, violent ripple in the rainy atmosphere. It struck the mugger square in the chest. The man's breath left his body in a whoosh. He was lifted off his feet and sent flying backward, slamming into the opposite brick wall with a sickening crunch. The knife clattered to the ground. The man slid down the wall, unconscious before he hit the pavement. Silence. The victim stared, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with a terror that was now directed entirely at Izuku. He looked from the crumpled form of his attacker to Izuku's outstretched hand, then back again. He didn't look grateful. He looked like he had just seen a demon. Izuku's heart sank. He looked at his own hand. That was just 5%. A flick of a finger. And it had been so violent. The mugger hadn't just been pushed, he'd been blasted. The sheer concussive force had been enough to shatter a nearby puddle and send a cascade of filthy water splashing against the walls. This world was different. The rules were different. The very physics of it felt fragile. The victim, regaining some semblance of sense, scrambled to his feet and ran, not even bothering to look back. He was screaming now, a string of terrified gibberish that Izuku didn't need to understand to interpret. Monster. Freak. The sounds echoed in the alley, a judgment he hadn't faced since he was a quirkless child. He had to go. Now, he vaulted onto the dumpster, then to a low-hanging pipe, and scrambled back up the fire escape, his protesting ribs sending waves of agony through his torso. He moved from rooftop to rooftop, a frantic, shadowy blur. Below, he could hear the sounds of people shouting, doors opening. He had drawn attention. The wrong kind of attention. He ran for what felt like miles, a desperate flight fueled by adrenaline and confusion. He finally found refuge in the husk of an old, abandoned tenement building, its windows boarded up, its door hanging off a single hinge. He slipped inside, the darkness and the smell of mold and decay enveloping him like a shroud. He climbed the rickety stairs, his every step echoing in the cavernous silence, until he found a top-floor room that was relatively dry. He collapsed onto the dusty floorboards, his back against the wall, and finally let himself breathe. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He was alone. Powerfully, terrifyingly alone. In a world that wasn't his, where his very nature was an anomaly. His power, the sacred torch passed down to him by his idol, was a weapon of terrifying, disproportionate force here. He couldn't just be a hero anymore. He had to be careful. As the adrenaline faded, despair began to seep back in. He pulled his knees to his chest, his mind a whirlwind of fear and loss. He was just a boy, an 18-year-old boy who had been fighting a war since he was 16. He was tired. He was so tired. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Then another. He buried his head in his arms, and for the first time since the raid on the Gunga Mountain villa, Izuku Midoriya allowed himself to weep. He cried for his friends, for his mother, for All Might. He cried for the world he had lost and for the terrifying, unknown world he was trapped in. He cried until there were no tears left, leaving only a hollow ache in his chest. It was in that hollow space that they appeared. He didn't see them with his eyes but in his mind. The familiar, shadowy chamber of One for All, with its 8 thrones of light. The vestiges. His only link to home. A tall, slender figure with wild, white hair stepped forward. His form, usually hazy, was clearer now, more defined. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first. *9th. Can you hear me? His voice wasn't a sound, but a direct thought, a concept imprinted on Izuku's consciousness. Izuku's own thoughts were a ragged mess, but he focused on the connection. First, what happened? Where are we? Yoichi's mental presence was calm, analytical. The energy that struck you, it was a reality-warping quirk. A rare and unstable power. When it collided with the singularity of One for All, which was already straining the fabric of space-time, it created a tear. It seems we have been pushed through it. Another figure, a woman with a kind but firm presence and a starburst mark near her eye, moved to stand beside Yoichi. Nana Shimura. Pushed through? Izuku thought, the concept so immense it was hard to grasp. You mean, we're in another dimension? Nana's voice was a comforting balm on his frayed nerves. It would appear so, sweetie. Everything feels different. Thinner. There are no other quirks here. We can't feel them. It's like a sky with no stars. The weight of that statement was crushing. No quirks. That explained the mugger. That explained the fragility of this world. He wasn't just in another country. He was in another universe. The hope of finding a way back, a fragile little flame he hadn't even realized he was protecting, was snuffed out. This was permanent. So, I'm stuck here, he projected, the thought laced with a desolate finality. This time, a new voice joined, one he recognized with a jolt of warmth and sorrow. The skeletal, yet overwhelmingly powerful presence of Tashinori Yagi. All Might, *, my boy. The voice was filled with a profound, aching concern. *, we are here with you. You are not alone. Never alone. *, the sight of his mentor, even as a spiritual echo, was almost enough to make him start crying again. *, All Might. I failed. I was taken out of the fight. Everyone, they might be. He couldn't finish the thought. *, You did not fail, young Midoriya, All Might's vestige insisted, his form glowing a little brighter. *, You fought with everything you had. That is all a hero can ever do. Now, you must survive. You must adapt. *, Izuku's mind latched onto a practical problem, a way to distract from the overwhelming grief. *, I can't even understand anyone. The language, *, Yoichi stepped forward again. * One for All is more than just a power stockpile. It is a confluence of consciousness. It learns. It adapts. We are connected to you, Ninth. As you listen, as you observe, we can help you process. We can help you understand. It will be an accelerated learning curve. Focus. *, Following the first guidance, Izuku closed his physical eyes and focused his senses outward. He listened to the sounds of the city filtering through the broken window, the shouts, the distant conversations, the snippets of news from a passing car radio. At first, it was a meaningless jumble, but then, guided by the combined consciousness of the vestiges, patterns began to emerge. Words started to separate from the noise. The raw data of the language was being fed directly into his mind, sorted and defined by the 8 minds linked to his. Another gang shooting down on 47th. Since the devil disappeared, this whole neighborhood's gone to hell. Fisk's guys are moving in, talking over everything. *, Ain't been safe since Daredevil hung it up. Place needs a protector. *, Hell's Kitchen, the devil, Daredevil, Fisk, The words began to click into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. This place, Hell's Kitchen, had a protector. A vigilante called Daredevil. And he was gone. Now, a man named Fisk was taking over, and the streets were bleeding. A power vacuum. He had seen firsthand what that looked like during his own dark, solo vigilante arc after the First War. He knew the kind of predators that crawled out of the woodwork when the light of a hero was extinguished. Nana Shimura's voice was soft, but carried an ironclad conviction. *, It seems this place is not so different from our world, Izuku. There are people who are afraid. People who need help. *, What am I supposed to do? Izuku asked them, his desperation raw. *, My power is too much for this place. I could kill someone by accident. I'm not a hero here, I'm a weapon of mass destruction. A gruff, stoic vestige, the second user, who rarely spoke, chimed in. His thoughts were sharp, pragmatic. *, Then you learn control. The kind you've never needed before. Precision over power. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. *, All Might's presence swelled with pride and sorrow. *, You have the heart of the world's greatest hero, my boy. That does not change with your location. You were a hero long before you inherited One for All, remember that. Remember why you started on this path. To save people. With a smile. *, A smile. The thought was so foreign it felt like it belonged to another person. How could he smile in this suffocating darkness? But they were right. All of them. He was trapped. He was alone, save for the ghosts in his soul. He could curl up in this room and waste away, a monument to a lost world. Or he could do the one thing he knew how to do. The one thing that gave him purpose. He could help. He slowly, painfully, got to his feet. The conversation with the vestiges had given him a sliver of strength, a renewed sense of purpose. He was a hero. His mission statement had not changed. He walked to the shattered window and looked out at the city. The rain had subsided to a fine mist, and the neon lights of the bars and delis below bled across the wet streets. It was a dark, broken place, filled with people living in fear. It reminded him of the stories All Might told of his time in America, before quirks, a time of different heroes. He reached up and gently touched the tattered fabric of his cowl. This was the symbol of Deku, the hero who could do it. A hero from another world. That hero might be gone, lost to the dimensional rift. But the spirit, the burning need to save, was still here. He looked at his reflection in a large shard of glass still clinging to the window frame. A stranger stared back. The face was his, but it was older, harder. The youthful roundness was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of hardship. Scars, old and new, mapped his skin, and his eyes held the weary weight of the war, a deep-seated sadness that might never leave. But as he watched, a tiny, familiar spark of green lightning flickered in their depths. A single, defiant ember in the overwhelming dark. This world might not know what a hero was. This city, this Hell's Kitchen, might only understand devils and kings. Fine. If this city needed a devil to protect it from its demons, then that's what he would become. He would learn its shadows. He would become its fear. He would be its protector. He held up a piece of his torn, green sleeve, the last remnant of the boy who wanted to be like All Might. He was no longer that boy. He was something else now, forged in loss and thrust into a new, harsher reality. I won't let anyone else suffer, he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. The promise wasn't just to the city sprawled out before him, but to the vestiges within him, and to the memory of everyone he had lost. Not while I'm here. Not while I can still stand. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was the 9th holder of One for All. And his watch had just begun. The first few days were a lesson in erasure. Izuku Midoriya, the hero in training known as Deku, the 9th holder of One for All, had to cease to exist. He started by shedding his skin. The tattered remnants of his hero costume, a vibrant green symbol of hope in his world, were a liability here. He carefully folded each piece. The ragged cowl, the cracked arm guards, the single remaining iron-soled boot, and hid them deep within a collapsed wall of the abandoned tenement he now called his shelter. It felt like burying a friend. He scavenged clothes from the same building, finding a faded, threadbare hoodie, a pair of worn jeans that were too short, and a pair of scuffed work boots in a forgotten closet. Dressed in the ghost of someone else's life, he looked in a grimy shard of mirror and saw a stranger. Just another piece of human detritus in a city full of it. He was invisible. It was a painful, but necessary, transformation. His new life operated on a nocturnal rhythm. During the day, he slept in his dusty sanctuary, the vestiges his only company, their silent presence a comforting weight in his mind. At night he explored. He moved like a phantom across the rooftops, observing, listening, and learning. Guided by the vestiges, his mind became a sponge, soaking up the foreign language, the angry shouts from a domestic dispute, the cheerful banter of a street corner hot dog vendor, the droning news reports from televisions flickering in apartment windows. It all became data. Yoichi and Nana acted as interpreters and tutors, their combined consciousnesses creating a psychic Rosetta Stone. Within 72 hours, the meaningless noise had resolved into the distinct, gritty cadence of English. He wasn't fluent, but he could understand. And he could learn more. He needed a central repository of information, a place to understand the very foundations of this strange new world. The answer was a grand, stone-faced building a dozen blocks away from his tenement, the New York Public Library. Pushing through the heavy oak doors was like stepping into another dimension entirely. After days of grime, decay, and the constant threat of violence, the library's hushed reverence was a balm to his soul. The air smelled of old paper, binding glue, and floor polish. Sunlight streamed through colossal arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like lazy fairies. People sat at long tables, their faces illuminated by the green glow of reading lamps, lost in their own worlds. It was a temple of peace. For the first time since his arrival, the knot of tension in Izuku's shoulders loosened a fraction. He started with the basics, heading for the public access computers. His fingers, calloused and scarred from years of brutal training, felt clumsy on the keyboard. He began with the most obvious question: heroes. The search results exploded across the screen. The Avengers. A team of beings so powerful they defied belief. He stared, wide-eyed, at images of a literal god of thunder wielding a hammer, a green behemoth of rage and strength that dwarfed even the strongest Nomu. and a man in a suit of armor that was a marvel of technology beyond anything Melissa's shield had ever conceived. He saw Captain America, a man with a star on his chest, whose story of self-sacrifice and unwavering morality resonated so deeply with him it made his chest ache for all might. This world had heroes. It had its own symbols of peace. But they were a world away. They fought cosmic threats, alien invasions, killer robots. They were legends who operated on a global, even galactic scale. They wouldn't notice the rot in a single neighborhood. They wouldn't hear the desperate whispers in a place like Hell's Kitchen. That kind of work, he knew, fell to smaller shoulders. He narrowed his search, Hell's Kitchen. Vigilante, The results were more subdued, more local, more real. Article after article appeared, most of them from the New York Bulletin. The bylines were often the same: Ben Urich, Karen Page. He clicked on the first one, an old piece by Urich titled, "The Devil and the Kingpin." He was pulled into a story of a single man's war against an empire. The articles painted a portrait of a terrifying, enigmatic figure. Daredevil. Clad in red, with horns like a demon, he moved through the city like a ghost, appearing from the shadows to dismantle criminal operations with brutal, acrobatic efficiency. He was a creature of the night, a whisper on the wind, a rumor made flesh. Urich's writing was a masterclass in building a mythos. He described the vigilante's impossible agility, his uncanny ability to seemingly predict his opponent's moves, and the sheer, palpable terror he inspired in the city's underworld. But as Izuku dug deeper, switching to the microfiche archives to read older, more detailed reports, a different picture began to emerge. Beneath the demonic imagery and the tales of violence, he found the core of a hero. Daredevil never killed. He was brutal, yes, often leaving his enemies with broken bones and shattered nerves, but he always left them breathing. He targeted the corrupt, the oppressors, the human monsters who preyed on the weak. He fought for the forgotten people of this neighborhood. He found an in-depth exposé by Karen Page, written after the Kingpin, a man named Wilson Fisk, had been temporarily exposed and incarcerated. Page's article focused on the vigilante's methods. She quoted an anonymous police source. "It's like he hears the whole city. He knows where the trouble is before it even starts. He navigates these rooftops like he was born on them, knows every secret path, every forgotten tunnel. He owns the kitchen's darkness." That sentence snagged in Izuku's analytical mind. He hears the whole city. He knows every secret path. It was an echo of his own danger sense, a preternatural awareness that went beyond normal human capability. But the articles made it clear Daredevil was believed to be human. So how? Was it training? Technology? Or something else entirely? The mystery of the man was as compelling as his actions. He spent the better part of 2 days in that library, absorbing everything he could. He learned of Daredevil's war against the mystical ninja clan known as the Hand, his battles with psychotic assassins, and his seemingly endless crusade against Wilson Fisk, the kingpin of crime. Fisk was the Shigaraki of this neighborhood, a figure of overwhelming power and influence whose corruption was the source of the city's decay. And according to the most recent articles, Fisk was consolidating power once again, filling the vacuum Daredevil's disappearance had left months ago. The last article he read was a somber opinion piece by Karen Page, dated 2 months prior. It wasn't an exposé, but a eulogy. She didn't claim to know what happened to the devil, but she wrote about the silence he left behind. A silence that was now being filled by the sounds of renewed gang warfare, cries for help that went unanswered, and the quiet, creeping footsteps of Fisk's empire reclaiming its territory. He left the library as the sun began to set, the city's lights painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The knowledge he gained didn't bring him comfort. It gave him a mission. This Daredevil, he was a true hero. A man who, with far less power than Izuku, had single-handedly held back the tide of darkness. He fought in the trenches, for the people the Avengers would never even see. He was a kindred spirit. And his work was unfinished. That night, Izuku didn't just patrol. He hunted. The clue from Karen Page's article echoed in his mind. He knows every secret path. Daredevil had an intimate, almost supernatural, knowledge of the city's layout. That implied bases of operation. Safe houses. places hidden from the world. How to find a place that was designed not to be found. He decided to use his own supernatural advantage. He stood on the edge of a rooftop, closed his eyes, and reached out with his senses. Not just his eyes and ears, but with danger sense. He tried to recalibrate it. He wasn't looking for immediate threats to himself, but for anomalies. He focused on the feeling of things that were out of place. A patch of silence in a noisy world. A cold spot in a warm building. A corner of the city that felt intentionally hidden, shielded. What are you doing, Ninth? Yoichi's voice was a curious whisper in his mind. Hunting a ghost, Izuku thought back, focusing his will. Daredevil was a master of stealth and secrecy. His hiding places would have to be perfect. So I'm not looking for a place, I'm looking for the perfection. For the place that tries too hard to be nothing. He spent hours leaping from rooftop to rooftop, a silent shadow against the moonless sky. He would pause on a precipice, extend his senses, and catalog the cityscape. He investigated a dozen false leads. An abandoned water tower that just felt empty. A sub-basement of a laundromat that hummed with an unusual electrical signature, which turned out to be an illegal crypto mining setup. He was beginning to grow frustrated when he felt it. On the edge of a residential block, a street of tired-looking brownstones, there was a void. It wasn't a threat that set off danger sense's alarm, but a quiet wrongness. It was a 5-story building, indistinguishable from its neighbors, but the top-floor apartment felt like a carefully constructed lie. The windows were grimy, but one pane was just a little too clean near the lock. The air around it was still, as if the usual city drafts were being subtly redirected by something on the roof. He landed softly on the adjoining rooftop and observed. There was no light, no sound. It looked abandoned. But felt guarded. He leaped across the gap, his worn boots making no sound on the tar paper roof. He found the source of the redirected air currents, a small, almost invisible ventilation unit cleverly disguised as part of the roof's flashing. It was still drawing a tiny, almost undetectable amount of power. This was it. He found the slightly too clean window. The lock was old and would be easy to break, but that would leave a trace. He didn't want to be an intruder, he wanted to be a successor. He summoned a single, thin tendril of black whip from his fingertip. The inky black energy solidified, snaking through the tiny gap between the window and the frame. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, he manipulated the tendril, feeling for the tumblers of the lock. A soft click echoed in the night. The window slid open. He slipped inside, melting into the shadows of the room. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust, but underneath it were other, sharper smells, antiseptic, old leather, and the faint, metallic tang of dried blood. The apartment was Spartan to the point of being monastic. A simple bed with a neatly folded blanket. A small table with one chair. A kitchenette that looked like it had never been used. A few law books were stacked on a crate in the corner. This wasn't a home. It was a staging ground. A monk's cell for a warrior of the night. Izuku moved through the small space, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of reverence and trepidation. He was standing in the sanctuary of the man who had become a legend. He felt like an interloper desecrating a holy site. He ran a hand along the wall, his fingertips searching for any inconsistency. His fingers brushed against a section of the plaster that felt different. Hollow. He pushed gently. A section of the wall clicked and swung inward, revealing a hidden closet. The breath caught in his throat. Hanging inside was the devil. A suit of crimson, armored fabric was mounted on a mannequin, the horned cowl staring out with empty, accusatory eyes. The suit was battered, scarred with knife cuts, and pockmarked by what looked like bullet impacts. It was a testament to 100 brutal battles. On a shelf below sat several pairs of billy clubs, one of which was split down the middle, its internal grappling hook cable frayed and broken. But it was the small, metal footlocker at the bottom of the closet that drew his full attention. It wasn't locked. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst spare bits of armor and medical supplies, were dozens of meticulously organized case files. And a small, leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, Izuku picked up the journal. He sat on the floor, the dim light from the city filtering through the window, and he began to read. He wasn't reading the words of Daredevil, the demon of Hell's Kitchen. He was reading the soul of Matt Murdock. The journal was filled with the man's thoughts, his fears, his philosophy. He wrote about his heightened senses, a world on fire with sound and smell and touch, and how he learned to master that sensory overload and turn it into a weapon. He wrote about his Catholicism, about his constant struggle with the morality of his actions, the fear of crossing the line from protector to punisher. Izuku read about Matt's fierce, protective love for his city and his friends, Foggy Nelson and Karen Page. He saw his own protective instincts reflected in the man's desperate need to keep his loved ones safe from his violent life. He felt a profound, aching connection to this stranger, a man from another universe who had walked a parallel path of pain and sacrifice. He turned to the case files. They were a library of the city's darkness. Meticulously detailed notes on Wilson Fisk's organization, from his top lieutenants down to his street-level enforcers. Psychological profiles of killers like Bullseye. Maps of the Hand's underground tunnels. Each file was a testament to Matt's brilliant legal and tactical mind. He wasn't just a brawler, he was a detective, a strategist. He found one journal entry that made him stop, his blood running cold with recognition. Asterisk. The fear is a tool. It must be. In the light, as a lawyer, I can fight for justice. But there are some men justice can't reach in a courtroom. They live in the dark, so I must meet them there. They must fear the horns, the symbol. They must believe a demon is hunting them, because they don't fear men. But they must never fear the man. The man is just trying to do good. The devil is the armor the man wears to protect his soul. Asterisk. Izuku closed the journal, his mind reeling. Asterisk. The devil is the armor the man wears to protect his soul. He thought of his own dark period after the First War, when he tried to shoulder the burden alone, pushing his friends away, becoming a grim, solitary figure to protect them. He had tried to become a symbol of fear to villains too. He understood. He understood so perfectly it hurt. He had a choice. He could leave this place, seal it up, and let the legend of Daredevil remain a memory. He could try to find his own way, to be Deku in this new, dark world. But his bright green costume and explosive powers were wrong for this city's shadows. His methods were too loud, too destructive. He would be seen as a monster, just as the mugging victim had seen him. Matt Murdock had already forged the perfect tool. He had created the exact symbol this city needed. A symbol of fear for the wicked, and a symbol of hope for the oppressed. The armor was already here. It just needed someone to wear it. He stood up, his decision made. He couldn't be Matt Murdock. He could never truly replace the man who had bled for this neighborhood. But he could honor his legacy. He could pick up the fallen standard and continue the fight. His Deku costume was a symbol of aspiring to be like All Might. It was time for a new symbol, one forged for this new reality. He began to work. He couldn't use the red suit. It was too damaged and tailored for a different build. But there were spare parts in the footlocker, black tactical pants, rolls of durable, carbon fiber-laced fabric, straps, and buckles. He took the dark tactical pants, which fit him well enough. He then took one of his own ruined green sleeves. The material was a unique, fire-resistant, and flexible polymer from his own world, and began carefully cutting it into strips. His movements were precise, methodical. He was no Mahatsum, but he had spent enough time with her, and with his own constant costume analysis, to know his way around repairs and modifications. He stitched the green fabric onto the pants as reinforced panels on the thighs and knees. He used more of it to pad the torso of a tight, black long-sleeved shirt he found. The green wasn't the bright, hopeful color of his old suit. In the dim light, it was a dark, menacing emerald, like deep forest shadows. It was a whisper of Deku, not a shout. The most important part was the mask. He took one of Matt's spare cowls from the locker. It was black, less armored than the red one, meant for stealth. The horns were smaller, more subtle. He looked at it, then at the tattered remains of his own cowl's respirator mouthpiece. He couldn't replicate it, but he could pay homage to the design. He took a reinforced piece of armor from Matt's kit, and, using a small tool set from the locker, carefully shaped and affixed it to the lower half of the cowl, creating a hardened, angular jawline that mimicked his own mask's iconic smile. He spent over an hour working, his focus absolute. When he was finished, he stood before a small, cracked mirror on the back of the closet door. The figure that stared back was a fusion of two worlds. The silhouette was Daredevil, dark, lean, and menacing, with the iconic horns cutting a demonic shape. But the details were his, the dark green accents that seemed to absorb the light. The reinforced jawline. The way the suit was pieced together spoke of a scavenger, a survivor. He slowly pulled the cowl over his head. It settled into place, the world narrowing to what he could see through the eye holes. The lenses weren't red. He had left them as they were, dark and empty. In the shadows, any hint of his own vibrant green eyes would be the only color anyone would see. A flash of emerald in the abyss. He wasn't Deku anymore, the smiling hero who saved everyone. He couldn't be. That boy belonged to another world, a brighter world. He wasn't Daredevil, the Catholic lawyer wrestling with his faith. That man's legacy was one he would strive to honor, but never claim. He was something new. Something born of necessity. This city was sick, and it needed a surgeon who wasn't afraid to cut out the cancer. Wilson Fisk and his ilk didn't fear heroes. They crushed them. But as Matt Murdock had understood, they feared the unknown. They feared the dark. They feared the devil. He picked up a pair of intact billy clubs, the polished wood cool and solid in his grasp. He could feel one for all humming within him, a quiet, controlled furnace. He would learn to use it as a scalpel, just as the second had advised. A whisper of its power to enhance his speed, a flicker to add force to a precise strike, a thread of black whip to ensnare, not to crush. He looked at his reflection one last time. The legend of the Devil of Hell's Kitchen had ended a few months ago. Tonight, it would be reborn. The city exhaled its nightly breath, a foul miasma of exhaust fumes, stale rain, and despair. From his perch atop the tenement, Izuku watched the streets below transform. The daytime facade of bustling commerce and strained civility melted away, revealing the grimy, infected tissue beneath. Shady figures materialized in doorways, deals were struck in hushed, guttural tones, and the ambient noise of the city shifted from the drone of traffic to a more predatory symphony of distant shouts, breaking glass, and the ever-present, mournful wail of sirens. This was the world Matt Murdock had fought for. This was the world Izuku now inherited. The new suit felt alien against his skin. It was lighter than his Yui costume, offering less ballistic protection but far more flexibility. The cowl was tight, the world framed by the two dark eye slits. It smelled of old leather and Matt Murdock's quiet determination. He ran a gloved finger over the billy clubs holstered on his thigh. They were simple, elegant weapons of hardwood and steel, a stark contrast to the complex support gear he was used to. There was no full gauntlet, no iron saws, no onboard computer. Just his body, his power, and his will. One for all simmered inside him, a caged star. He had spent the last several hours in the safe house, meditating, trying to recalibrate his connection to the quirk. The vestiges had been invaluable guides. The second and third users, men who had lived and fought as vigilantes in a lawless era, coached him. Forget the smash, the second's thoughts were sharp, like flint striking steel. That is a weapon for leveling mountains. Here, you will be leveling men. Think smaller. Infinitesimal. A single spark, not a lightning storm. Use the power to augment, not to obliterate. Nana Shimura was gentler. Feel the flow, Izuku. Instead of pushing it out in a burst, let it circulate. Let it make you faster than a camera shutter, stronger than a hydraulic press, but quietly. Be the ghost in the machine. He tried it now, standing on the ledge. He activated full cowling, but instead of the brilliant, crackling emerald lightning that usually sheathed his body, he throttled it down, until it was nothing more than an invisible hum beneath his skin. A 1% output. The power was there, a subtle thrum of energy making his muscles feel coiled and impossibly potent, but there was no outward sign. He was just a dark figure against a darker sky. He had a target. From Matt's files, he'd identified a low-level drug distribution ring operating out of a condemned meatpacking plant on the west side. They were small-time, but notoriously violent, one of the many crews that had grown bolder in Daredevil's absence. They were a test. A place to blood his new mantle and methods. He ran. His first leap was a revelation. With the barest whisper of OFA in his legs, he sailed across the 50-foot gap between buildings, landing on the opposite roof with less sound than a falling leaf. The sheer, silent grace of it was intoxicating. He felt untethered, a creature of the rooftops. He flowed over obstacles, air conditioning units, ventilation shafts, satellite dishes, with an acrobatic ease that felt both foreign and deeply instinctual. He was channeling the ghost of Matt Murdock, but fueling it with a power Matt could never have dreamed of. He reached the meatpacking district in minutes. The plant was a hulking brick behemoth, its windows boarded and its smokestacks silent skeletons against the bruised purple sky. A single, bare bulb illuminated a loading dock where a rusty panel van was parked. 4 men loitered, their breath fogging in the chill air. Izuku dropped into a crouch behind the rooftop's parapet, observing. Danger sense was a low thrum at the base of his skull, a confirmation of the casual menace below. They were armed. He could see the bulge of a pistol under one man's jacket, another held a lead pipe. His training, his very hero philosophy, screamed for a direct, overwhelming approach. Announce his presence, incapacitate them swiftly, minimize the chance for them to harm each other or any potential hostages. The Deku method. I am here, but he wasn't Deku tonight. He was the devil. And the devil didn't knock. He circled the roof, finding a rusted-over skylight. It was filthy, but through a small, clear patch, he could see into the cavernous space below. The interior was a chilling tableau of decay. Rusted hooks hung from the ceiling on chains, remnants of the building's bloody purpose. Below, another half-dozen men were gathered around a makeshift table, cutting and bagging a white powder under the harsh glare of a portable work light. He had his plan. Stealth. Precision. Fear. He returned to the edge of the roof, directly above the loading dock. He took a deep, centering breath. Scalpel, not sledgehammer, he dropped. His descent was a silent, controlled fall. He used a minuscule burst from his fingertips to kill his momentum just before he landed behind the panel van, his boots making zero sound on the cracked concrete. The 4 men were less than 15 feet away, their backs to him, laughing at some crude joke. He moved. He was a blur of black and dark green. The man with the pipe was his first target. Before the man could even register a presence behind him, Izuku's hand chopped down on the back of his neck in a perfectly executed nerve strike. The man's eyes rolled up in his head, and he crumpled without a sound, the pipe clattering on the ground. The sound, though slight, alerted the others. One of them turned, his eyes widening. What the? He never finished the sentence. Izuku was already on him, one of the billy clubs now in his hand. He didn't swing it like a bat. He used it as an extension of his fist, striking the man's wrist with a sharp crack of bone. The man howled, dropping the pistol he'd been reaching for. A follow-up strike to the temple, precise and controlled, sent him slumping to the ground. The remaining 2 were panicked now, fumbling for their own weapons. Izuku gave them no time. He lashed out with a thread of black whip, not the thick, destructive tendrils he used against villains, but a thin, whisper-quiet strand that wrapped around one man's ankle, yanking him off his feet. As the man fell, Izuku closed the distance to the last one, his movements a fluid, terrifying dance. The man swung a crowbar wildly. Izuku ducked under the swing, his left hand grabbing the man's wrist and twisting, his right elbow striking the man's chin with a sharp crack. 4 men down in less than 5 seconds. All unconscious. No alarms raised. He felt a grim satisfaction. This was different. This was clean. This was the precision the second had spoken of. He slipped inside through the loading bay door, the cavernous interior of the plant swallowing him whole. The 6 men inside were just realizing their friends outside had gone silent. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head who seemed to be the leader, barked an order. Mickey, go see what's taking them so long. Mickey never took a step. From the high, shadowed rafters, a billy club, thrown with impossible speed and accuracy, struck the main power cable for the work light. Sparks flew, and the room was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy upper windows. Panic erupted. Shouts and curses filled the air. What the hell was that? Get a flashlight. Who's there? Izuku, his eyes already adjusted to the dark, was a predator in his element. He dropped from the rafters, landing silently on a catwalk. A man below him, fumbling with his phone to use its light, was suddenly hoisted into the air by an unseen force as a black whip tendril wrapped around his chest and deposited him, gagged and bound, in the rafters. "Where'd Jimmy go?" a voice cried out, laced with terror. Izuku moved along the catwalk, his soft-soled boots making no sound. He was above the leader now. He listened to the man's frantic heartbeat, the sound of frantic drum in the silent room. He dropped directly behind him. The leader spun around, sensing something, but he saw only an empty space. A cold whisper of air tickled the back of his neck. "Boo," Izuku said, his voice a low, distorted growl, an imitation of the filtered voice from his old mask. The man screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. He fired his pistol wildly into the darkness. The muzzle flash illuminated a fleeting image for the other gangsters, a horned silhouette, a flash of dark green, eyes that seemed to glow with a faint, predatory light. It was a demon, ripped from the pages of a nightmare. Then the silhouette was gone. The leader's gun was ripped from his hand, flying into the shadows. A brutal series of strikes, too fast to be seen, landed on his chest, his arms, his legs. He felt his bones creak, his breath stolen from his lungs, before a final, crushing blow to the side of his head sent him into oblivion. The remaining 4 men broke. They were no longer gangsters. They were just terrified men trapped in the dark with a monster. They scrambled for the exits, tripping over each other in their haste. Izuku let them get close to the door. Hope was the most effective ingredient in terror. Just as the first one reached for the handle, Izuku landed in front of them, a solid wall of shadow. He didn't move. He just stood there, letting their fear build. One of them, in a fit of desperate courage, charged with a knife. This was the moment he had dreaded, the moment his control would be tested. The man lunged. Izuku sidestepped, the motion so fluid it looked like he'd teleported. His hand shot out, not in a fist, but with his fingers open. He tapped the man's chest. * Delaware smash. 0.5%. It wasn't a flick. It was a tap. A touch. A focused, pinpoint application of concussive force no larger than a coin. The air pressure didn't send the man flying. It simply slammed into his sternum like a sledgehammer swung by an invisible giant. The air exploded from his lungs in a single, agonized gasp. His eyes went wide with shock and pain, and he collapsed, the knife falling from his nerveless fingers. He was out cold, but he would live. No broken ribs, just the worst body blow of his life. The other 3 froze, staring at their fallen comrade, then back at the horned shadow. They dropped their weapons, hands shooting into the air in a universal gesture of surrender. Izuku felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. He had done it. Control. Precision. He had neutralized 10 armed men without causing serious injury, without revealing the true nature of his power. But in his relief, he made a rookie mistake. He had focused so much on controlling his power that he neglected the fundamentals of his environment. His final, minuscule Delaware smash, while perfectly controlled in its impact on the man, still had an effect on the air around it. The compressed air shot past the gangster and slammed into the brick wall behind him. It wasn't a destructive blast, but it was enough. The old, water-damaged brick, already structurally unsound, groaned in protest. A web of cracks spread from a single point. Then, with a sound like tearing linen, a 10-foot section of the upper wall peeled away and crashed down onto the loading dock outside, taking a chunk of the roof with it. The sound of 1,000 pounds of brick and mortar hitting concrete was like a bomb going off. Izuku cursed under his breath. So much for stealth. He quickly and efficiently bound the remaining 3 gangsters with their own belts, then used a thick strand of black whip to haul the unconscious leader up and secure him to a meat hook, leaving him dangling as a final, terrifying message. He left the others in a pile, then melted back into the shadows and out a broken window just as the first sirens began their approach in the distance. His approach was all wrong. He'd achieved his objective, but the execution was a mess. He was still thinking like Deku, ending the fight with a final, powerful move. The old devil, he realized, wouldn't have needed a final move. The fight would have been over before the enemy even knew it had begun. That final, quiet tap was still too loud for this world. He'd used a scalpel, but he'd brought it down with the force of a hammer. The result was a mess, collateral damage that drew massive, unwanted attention. He was bleeding. He hadn't even noticed it during the fight, but as the adrenaline began to fade, a sharp, burning pain flared on his left forearm. He looked down. A deep gash, at least 4 inches long, was weeping blood. One of the last gangsters, the one with the knife, must have caught him with a lucky shot as he dodged. It wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, but it was bleeding freely, staining the black fabric of his suit. He needed medical supplies. Matt's safe house had some, but it was too far, and he didn't want to lead a trail of blood back to it. He needed somewhere close, somewhere discreet. He remembered a detail from one of the files he'd read in the library, a news clipping about a back-alley clinic that provided no questions asked medical care. The name of the night nurse had been mentioned, Claire Temple. It was a long shot, but it was his only option. He limped across the rooftops, his side aching, his arm throbbing. He found the clinic tucked away in an alley not 5 blocks from the meatpacking plant. It was little more than a storefront with a faded red cross painted on the window. A single light burned inside. He dropped into the alley, landing heavily. He was exhausted. The combination of his old injuries, the new gash, and the sheer mental strain of controlling OFA at such a fine level had left him drained. He leaned against the brick wall, his head swimming. He needed help. He knocked on the clinic's back door, a series of soft, hesitant taps. After a moment, the door creaked open a few inches. A woman's cautious face appeared in the gap. She was dark-skinned, with tired but intelligent eyes that took in his entire state in a single, sweeping glance. The horned cowl, the makeshift suit, the blood dripping from his arm. She didn't look shocked or scared. She just looked weary. Resigned. "You're new," she said, her voice calm and even. Izuku didn't know what to say. He just held up his bleeding arm. She sighed, a long, put-upon sound. "God, not again. Get in before someone sees you." She opened the door wider, and he stumbled inside. The clinic was small, clean, and smelled strongly of antiseptic. It was an island of sterile order in the city's chaotic filth. She pointed to a metal examination table. "Sit. And try not to bleed all over my floor." "I just mopped." He did as he was told, perching on the edge of the table. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves with practiced efficiency, her movements deft and professional. She was already assessing the wound. "It's clean, but it's deep," she said, her voice clinical. "You'll need stitches. Looks like a knife wound." "Did you get the other guy?" Izuku just nodded, still slightly dazed. "Good," she said, without a hint of judgment. She began cleaning the gash, her touch firm but gentle. "The last guy who wore horns was a regular of mine." "Then he wasn't. I'd hoped that meant I could finally get some sleep on my night shifts." She looked up, her gaze sharp and analytical. "You're not him. You're younger. Taller too. And you moved differently." He was quiet. You sound like a building falling down." Izuku flinched. She had heard the collapse. Of course she had. The whole neighborhood probably had. "It was a mistake," he managed to say, his voice a low rasp. "They usually are," she replied, preparing a needle and thread. "This will sting." As she began to expertly stitch the wound, she kept talking, her voice a low, steady murmur. "Look, I don't know who you are or why you're doing this. And frankly, I don't want to. But I'm going to give you the same advice I gave him. This city, it doesn't just chew you up and spit you out. It swallows you whole." The man who wore that mask before, he understood that. He used fear, sure, but it was a scalpel. He was precise. He cut out the infection without killing the patient. He was a whisper in the dark, not an explosion. Her words were a perfect, painful echo of the seconds and of his own conclusions. A whisper, not an explosion. A scalpel, not a bomb. He knew when to hit, and when to fade, she continued, her focus entirely on her work. He used the city's own darkness against itself. He didn't try to outshine it with raw power. You do that, you just become a bigger target. You paint a bullseye on your back for every psycho and would be kingpin from here to the Bronx. You want to survive this life? Learn from him. Be a ghost. Be a rumor. Because the moment you become a headline, you're already losing. She finished the last stitch and tied it off with a neat, surgical knot. She wrapped his arm in a clean bandage, her work finished. The pain had subsided to a dull, manageable throb. There, she said, stripping off her gloves. Don't get it wet for a couple of days. And try not to get stabbed again for at least a week. My supplies aren't free. Izuka looked at the neat bandage, then up at her face. He saw no judgment in her eyes, only a deep, profound exhaustion. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a witness, a confessor for the city's broken guardians. She was the first person in this world to show him any semblance of kindness. Thank you, he said, the words feeling inadequate. My name is... He stopped. What could he say? Deku? Izuku? Both were names from a dead world. She held up a hand. Don't. It's better if I don't know. Just be careful, kid. You've got too much power and not enough control. That's a dangerous combination in this city. She looked him dead in the eye. The old devil fought with his senses, his fists, and his faith. He was a scalpel. You feel like a bomb waiting to go off. Learn to be a scalpel, or this city will make you detonate. The words hit him harder than any physical blow. A bomb waiting to go off. Was that what he was? A walking, talking catastrophe, a misplaced nuke in a world of knives? He slid off the table, his body aching with a weariness that was more than just physical. He looked at this woman, this Claire Temple, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had not only healed his body but had given him the most crucial lesson of his new life. He couldn't be Deku in a red mask. He couldn't just graft his old methods onto a new persona. He had to truly learn. He had to strip himself down to the core and rebuild his entire understanding of what it meant to fight, what it meant to save. He had to learn to be what this city, this dark and wounded kitchen, actually needed. He gave her a single, solemn nod of understanding. He had no money to pay her, nothing to offer but a promise he hoped he could keep. A promise to be better. He slipped out the back door and disappeared into the night, leaving Claire Temple alone in her small, sterile sanctuary. She watched him go, then turned and began cleaning the bloody instruments. Another ghost treated, another secret kept, just another Tuesday night in Hell's Kitchen. As Izuku made his way back to his shelter, Claire's words replayed in his mind. Be a scalpel, not a bomb. He looked down at his bandaged arm, then up at the indifferent skyline. His first night was over. He had won the battle, but he had failed the test. He had a long, painful education ahead of him. And in Hell's Kitchen, the tuition was paid in blood and scars. Wilson Fisk did not believe in ghosts. He believed in power, in order, and in the unassailable primacy of his own will. Ghosts were the fanciful concoctions of weak minds, whispered fears that scattered like dust in the face of true, tangible authority. The devil of Hell's Kitchen, the red-horned boogeyman who had haunted his operations for years, was not a ghost. He was a man. A uniquely skilled, infuriatingly persistent man, but a man nonetheless, and Fisk had dealt with him. A building had been dropped on him. The problem had been solved. The board had been cleared. Yet, for the past week, whispers had begun to circulate again. Like a recurring fever, the name was being spoken in the dark corners of his city. The devil was back. Fisk stood before the floor-to-ceiling armored window of his penthouse, a monolithic figure silhouetted against the glittering, indifferent skyline of New York. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, the fabric stretched taut across the mountains of muscle that constituted his frame. In his hand he held a glass of brandy, the amber liquid catching the light. He did not drink it. He simply held it, the coolness of the glass a grounding sensation in his massive palm. Behind him, the room was a monument to minimalist opulence. White marble floors, a single, priceless abstract painting on the wall, and the lingering scent of money and power. His city was breathing easier now. Under his careful, unseen guidance, order was being restored. The chaotic, freelance criminality that had festered in the power vacuum was being pruned, absorbed, or eliminated. His enterprises flourished, his control solidified daily. The return of this disruptive variable was irritating. The first reports had been easy to dismiss. A few low-level thugs found beaten and bound. Typical vigilante nonsense, likely some copycat inspired by the original's legend. Fisk had barely given it a second thought. Then came the incident at the old meatpacking plant. That had been different. An entire distribution crew, 10 men, neutralized. That was a significant disruption. But it was the nature of the incident that had truly snagged his attention. The initial reports from the terrified survivors were contradictory, almost hysterical. They spoke of a demon that moved in the dark, of impossible speed, of being attacked by shadows. Standard fear-mongering. But then came the official police report, which his sources had quietly forwarded to him. It mentioned significant structural damage to the building. An exterior wall collapsed, apparently from an internal, concussive force. Yet, none of the gangsters had explosives, and none of the men had injuries consistent with an explosion. They were beaten, broken, but alive. It was a contradiction. Immense power coupled with precise, non-lethal application. That was a new and dangerous combination. The original devil was an acrobat and a brawler, not a wrecking ball. This was someone new. The door to his office chimed softly. "Enter." Fisk's voice was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the building. James Wesley entered, his movements as quiet and precise as his tailored gray suit. Wesley was Fisk's consigliere, his right hand, a man whose placid demeanor masked a mind as sharp and ruthless as a razor. He held a tablet in his hand. "Sir," Wesley began, his tone perfectly neutral. "We have an update on the Hell's Kitchen situation." Fisk turned slowly from the window, his gaze settling on his subordinate. His eyes, dark and intelligent, betrayed nothing. "The copycat, perhaps something more," Wesley countered, tapping the screen of the tablet. "We've been compiling all reports of his appearances over the last week. We also managed to pull security footage from a bodega across from the meatpacking plant. It's grainy, but..." He handed the tablet to Fisk. The image was of poor quality, distorted by rain and distance. But it was clear enough. A dark figure, leaner than the original devil, dropping from a rooftop. The figure moved with an impossible, liquid grace. Then, a few minutes later, the footage shook violently as the wall of the plant collapsed outward in a cloud of dust and debris. The figure was not seen leaving. "He's faster," Fisk observed, his voice a low murmur. "And the damage to the building, it suggests a level of strength far beyond the original." "My thoughts exactly, sir," Wesley said. "The survivors' accounts, once you strip away the hysteria, all point to the same conclusion. Unnatural speed and strength." One of them claimed he was blasted without ever being touched. Fisk's massive fingers tightened slightly on his glass. He was a student of power, in all its forms. He understood that there were individuals in the world with exceptional abilities. The green behemoth that had torn up Harlem, the flying Norse god. He had always considered them a different class of problem, operating on a stage far removed from his own. The idea of one of them taking an interest in the street-level intricacies of his empire was disquieting. "He is not the same man," Fisk stated, the words a final judgment. "But he is using the same symbol." "Why? The symbol is effective," Wesley answered logically. "It inspires fear in our men and a foolish sense of hope in the general populace. It's a powerful piece of psychological warfare. This newcomer, whoever he is intelligent enough to understand that. Intelligence and power," Fisk mused, placing the brandy glass down on a marble coaster with a soft click. "A volatile combination. I want to know who he is. What he is. I want to know his limits, find a way to draw him out. Give him a puzzle he cannot solve with his fists alone." Wesley nodded, already processing the command. "There is the new product. Inferno. Its distribution has been aggressive. It's causing a notable spike in overdoses and gang-related homicides. It creates the kind of chaos he would feel compelled to address." Fisk gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "A loose thread. Let him pull on it. See where it leads him. And arrange a welcoming committee for him at the end of the line. Something loud. I want to see what happens when this new devil is forced to use his full strength." "Of course, sir." Wesley said. He turned to leave, his task already broken down into a dozen smaller, actionable steps in his mind. And Wesley. Fisk's voice stopped him at the door. Sir, tell our people to be careful. A cornered animal with unfamiliar claws is a dangerous thing. Fisk turned back to the window, his gaze sweeping over the kingdom he had built. Let's see if this new ghost knows how to bleed. For Izuku, the city had become a textbook, and its suffering was the lesson plan. After his disastrous first outing, he had thrown himself into his new role with the obsessive, analytical fervor that had once been reserved for hero analysis notebooks. He spent his nights in a grueling routine: patrol, study, train. Patrol was a silent, educational affair. He moved across the rooftops, a wraith in dark green and black, forcing himself to simply observe. He catalogued the city's rhythms, the ebb and flow of its criminal tides. He watched deals go down, mapped out territories of the burgeoning gangs, and memorized the faces of Fisk's enforcers. He used his enhanced hearing, a gift of one for all he was only now learning to finely tune, to listen, to learn. Study was his time in Matt Murdock's safe house. He devoured the case files, absorbing the intricate web of corruption Fisk had woven through the city. He learned the names, the hierarchies, the front corporations. It was like studying for the most important exam of his life. He read Matt's journal again and again, trying to absorb the man's philosophy, his tactical genius, his intimate understanding of the city's soul. Training was a brutal, self-imposed regimen. In the deepest, most secluded sub-basement of the tenement, he practiced. He pushed OFA to the brink of his control, trying to master the art of the whisper. He practiced holding a 1% output for hours, until it felt as natural as breathing. He summoned Black Whip, not as whips, but as single, delicate threads, using them to pick up a coin without making a sound, or to disarm a training dummy without knocking it over. He learned to use float not to fly, but to make his falls utterly silent, to change his trajectory in midair by microns. It was the hardest training he had ever endured, a battle against his own instincts to go bigger, faster, stronger. He was retraining 16 years of muscle memory. It was during one of his patrols, perched atop an old church and listening to the city's heartbeat, that he first heard the whispers of Inferno. He heard it in the desperate, hushed conversation between two users in an alley, one describing an unparalleled high followed by a soul-crushing crash. He heard it in the frantic emergency call from a mother who had found her son unconscious, his lips blue. He heard it in the angry, fearful words of a local priest, Father Lantom, who spoke to a parishioner about a new plague sweeping through the kitchen. This was it. A clear, definable threat. A poison seeping into the veins of his new home. This was a thread he could pull. His first move was to seek out the one person in this world he could trust, Claire Temple. He found her on her break, sitting on a bench in a small, neglected park behind the clinic. She didn't look surprised to see his shadowed form drop from a nearby fire escape and land silently in the alley behind her. "Stitches holding up?" she asked without turning around, taking a sip of her coffee. "Yes. Thank you," he said, his voice a low rasp. He stayed in the shadows, respecting the distance. "I need information. I'm a nurse, not an encyclopedia." She sighed, finally turning to look at him. She noted his posture, the controlled stillness. He seemed different. Less like a lost, angry kid. More focused. "A new drug," Izuku said. "They're calling it Inferno." Claire's expression hardened. The weariness in her eyes was replaced by a familiar anger. "I know it. I've treated 3 ODs this week alone. 2 didn't make it. It's bad. Some kind of synthetic opioid cocktail, but it's cut with something that causes aggressive, paranoid behavior before the crash. Turns users into monsters, then kills them. Who's selling it?" She shrugged, a gesture of helplessness that seemed to pain her. "It's everywhere. The Kitchen Irish, the new Russian outfits, a few of the smaller gangs. It's flooding the streets. It's almost like someone wants them to have it, wants them to tear each other apart." Her words clicked with something he'd read in Matt's files about Fisk's methods. * divide and conquer. Fisk wouldn't just sell a new drug, he'd use it as a weapon, a tool to destabilize his rivals before absorbing their territory. "Thank you, Claire," he said. "For what?" "Telling you what you probably already know," she asked, a bitter edge to her voice. Just be careful. The old devil, he ended up with a building on his head for poking this particular bear. Fisk doesn't play. I'll be careful, he promised, though the words felt hollow even to him. He spent the next 2 nights hunting. He wasn't the bombastic force of his first outing. He was the ghost Claire had advised him to be. He moved through the city's shadows, a terrifying, unseen presence. He'd find a low-level dealer, isolate him, and descend. A whisper of movement, a flicker of dark green in the corner of their eye, and then a swift, silent, non-lethal takedown. He'd leave them for the police, but not before a quiet, terrifying interrogation. He learned to modulate his voice, letting the cowl's design deepen it into an inhuman growl. He'd hold a man against a wall, his face inches from theirs, the faint green glow of his eyes the only thing visible in the dark. He wouldn't need to use his strength. The sheer, unnerving presence of him was enough. Fear was a more effective tool than any fist. "Who's your supplier?" he'd growl, the words vibrating through their bones. They always talked. He followed the chain, link by agonizing link. From the street corner dealers to the tenement trap houses. From the trap houses to the mid-level distributors. Each step took him deeper into the rot. With each interrogation, he gathered more pieces of the puzzle. The name that kept coming up, the source of this poison, was a shell corporation he recognized from Matt's files, VCI Shipping. A known front for Fisk's import operations, but he needed more than a name. He needed a location. He finally got his break from a terrified distributor he cornered in a grimy chop shop. The man, pinned to a car chassis by a single, terrifyingly strong hand, babbled everything he knew. The main shipment was coming in tomorrow night. A warehouse down by the docks. Warehouse 12. Izuku knew it was a trap. It had to be. It was all too easy, a perfectly laid trail of breadcrumbs. Fisk was too smart, too methodical, to leave such an obvious path. He was being tested. Fisk had seen a new piece on the board and wanted to know how it moved. He didn't care. A trap was still an opportunity. An opportunity to strike a real blow against Fisk's operation and, more importantly, to get this poison off the streets. The next night, he approached Warehouse 12 with extreme caution. The docks were a graveyard of rusting cranes and decaying buildings, the air thick with the smell of salt, creosote, and stagnant water. He didn't go in on the ground. He spent an hour on the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, observing. He used his enhanced senses to their absolute limit, listening, watching. He saw the guards. 6 of them, patrolling the perimeter. They were better equipped than the street thugs he'd been dealing with. They wore tactical gear and carried automatic rifles, moving with a professional, military discipline. They were mercenaries, not gangsters. Inside, he could hear more men. And something else. A low, rhythmic hum. It was a sound he couldn't place, but it set danger sense on edge. Not as a screaming alarm, but as a persistent, low-grade hum of anxiety. He couldn't go through the front. He circled the building from the rooftops, finding a series of ventilation shafts near the back. They were narrow, but he was flexible. He prized open a grate and slipped inside, the metal cold and tight around him. He moved through the ventilation system like a serpent, his progress silent. He found a grate that looked down on the main warehouse floor. The scene below confirmed his suspicions. It was a bottling and distribution center for Inferno. An assembly line of men in hazmat suits was mixing volatile chemicals in large vats, the source of the humming sound. The air shimmered with fumes. Others were packaging the finished product into small vials. In the center of the room, overseeing the operation, stood a figure he recognized from pictures in Matt's files. Leland Owlsley, one of Fisk's top financial advisors, a man known as the Owl. This was a major node in Fisk's network. Taking it down would be a significant victory. He mapped out the interior in his mind. 24 hostiles on the floor, plus the 6 outside. All armed. He could see their patrol routes, the blind spots, the potential chain reactions. A stray bullet hitting one of those chemical vats could turn the whole warehouse into a fireball. This required the scalpel. He dropped from the vent into the high rafters, a silent shadow among other shadows. He began his work. He moved through the network of beams and catwalks above the warehouse floor, a spider in a web of steel. One by one, he began to pluck the guards from their patrols. A thin strand of black whip would snake down, wrap around the man's mouth and neck, and hoist him silently into the darkness. A quick nerve strike, and the man was unconscious, bound, and secured to a beam. One by one, the number of guards dwindled. The men on the floor, focused on their work, never even noticed. It was a silent, terrifying culling. He took out 8 men this way, his movements economical, his control absolute. He was about to take out a 9th when danger sense, which had been humming steadily, suddenly screamed. It wasn't a general sense of unease anymore. It was a focused, piercing shriek directed at a specific point. The main cargo doors. They were opening. Izuku flattened himself against the beam, melting into the shadows. Below, the men stopped their work, looking towards the doors. A massive, armored truck backed into the warehouse. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out who did not belong. He was built like a brick wall, clad in tactical armor with a distinctive skull-like mask and piston-powered gauntlets. Izuku didn't know his name, but he recognized the archetype instantly. This was a professional. A specialist. This was the trap. Owlsley! The man's voice was a gravelly bark, amplified by his mask. My team has the perimeter secure. Your boys look a little thin on the ground. Owlsley, a frail-looking man in a pristine suit, scurried over. Crossbones! What are you doing here? The Kingpin didn't mention you were coming. Change of plans? Crossbones said, his gaze sweeping the rafters. It was a predator's gaze, searching, hunting. Got a report of a pest problem. Kingpin wants it exterminated. Loudly, the remaining mercenaries on the floor raised their weapons, their casual postures snapping to combat readiness. They weren't just guards anymore, they were a firing squad. Izuku's mind raced. The trap had been sprung. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a professional killer in a room full of explosive chemicals. A direct assault was suicide. A quiet retreat was no longer an option. He had to change the equation. He looked around, his analytical mind dissecting the environment. The chemical vats. The power conduits running along the walls. The heavy chains hanging from the ceiling. He made his decision. He wasn't going to be the ghost anymore. Fisk wanted a loud, welcoming committee? He was about to get a hurricane. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in over a week, he let the lightning off the leash. *1 for all, full cowling. 15%. Emerald lightning, brilliant and fierce, exploded into existence around him, bathing the dark rafters in a blinding green glow. Every mercenary in the room, including Crossbones, snapped their heads up, their eyes wide with shock. Contact! Crossbones roared. Light him up! The warehouse erupted in a deafening storm of automatic gunfire. Bullets sparked off the steel beams around Izuku, whining through the air. But he was already gone. He moved with a speed that defied the eye, a crackling green comet in the darkness. He dropped from the rafters, not to the floor, but onto the side of one of the massive chemical vats. He ran along its curved surface, the bullets of the mercenaries tracking him a half-second too late. He leaped from the vat, twisting in midair. Air Force, he flicked a concentrated burst of air from his glove, not at a person, but at a heavy chain hoist dangling from the ceiling. The chain, weighing several hundred pounds, swung like a scythe through the group of mercenaries, scattering them like bowling pins. He landed on the floor in a crouch, the concrete cracking under the impact. He looked up, his green eyes glowing with intensity from behind his cowl, and met the gaze of Crossbones. So, Crossbones growled, a feral grin audible in his voice. You're the new devil. He cracked his knuckles, the pistons on his gauntlets hissing. Gonna be a hell of a lot more fun to kill than the last one. Crossbones charged, his movements surprisingly fast for a man his size. He threw a punch, his gauntlet whistling through the air with enough force to pulp a normal man. Izuku didn't try to block it. He ducked under the blow, the wind from the near miss rustling his cowl. He pivoted, driving his elbow into Crossbones' side. The blow, backed by 15% of OFA, would have shattered a lesser man's ribs. On Crossbones' armored suit, it produced a dull clang and a grunt of surprise. The other mercenaries were recovering, raising their rifles. Izuku couldn't stay in one place. He pushed off Crossbones, using the man's own bulk as a springboard. He shot into the air, twisting and firing off 2 more Air Force blasts. One hit the main power conduit on the wall, showering the area in sparks and plunging half the warehouse into flickering emergency lighting. The other hit a stack of empty barrels, sending them tumbling into the path of the advancing mercenaries. He was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. He used Black Whip to disarm 3 men at once, their rifles flying from their hands. He used Smokescreen, a quirk he rarely used, to fill a section of the warehouse with a thick, choking cloud, sowing confusion. Crossbones, enraged, charged into the smoke. "You can't hide from me, you little freak!" Izuku, his senses sharp, met the charge. Inside the smokescreen, it was a brutal, close-quarters brawl. Crossbones was a master of dirty fighting, throwing elbows, headbutts, and knees. Izuku was forced to rely on his superior speed and danger sense to stay one step ahead. Every blow from Crossbones' gauntlets that he dodged left a small crater in the concrete floor. Izuku knew he couldn't win a war of attrition. The man's armor was too tough, and he was a relentless brawler. He needed to end this. He needed an opening. He feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Crossbones' legs out from under him. The big man roared in surprise as he fell. Izuku didn't press the attack. He used the moment to leap back, putting distance between them, back into the main, open area of the warehouse. Owlsley, who had been cowering behind a stack of crates, made a run for the armored truck. "Kill him!" he shrieked. "Just kill him!" Izuku couldn't let him escape. He was the key. Crossbones was back on his feet, his skull mask radiating pure fury. "Nowhere left to run." "I'm not running," Izuku said, his voice calm. He settled into a low stance, the green lightning around him intensifying. He was drawing the energy inward, focusing it. *FA gene. He built the kinetic energy, coil after coil, ready to be unleashed. He could feel the familiar, thrilling power building in his legs and torso. Crossbones charged again, seeing Izuku's stance as a challenge. This was it. The moment Fisk wanted to see. The test. Izuku waited until the last possible second. As Crossbones' fist flew towards his face, he activated Float, lifting himself just 6 inches off the ground. The punch whistled harmlessly under his feet. At the same time, he released the stored energy of FA gene through his entire body, combining it with a single, devastatingly precise application of One for All. *St. Louis Smash. 30%. He didn't aim for Crossbones' head or chest. He aimed for the floor. His axe kick came down with the force of a meteor. The impact wasn't a loud crack, it was a deep, resonant boom that shook the entire building. The concrete floor didn't just crack, it shattered. A shockwave radiated out from the point of impact, throwing the remaining mercenaries off their feet. The floor beneath Crossbones gave way entirely, and the massive mercenary fell into the maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the warehouse, his armor clanging against the pipes. The fight was over. The mercenaries were down, their leader was neutralized in a tunnel, and Owlsley was frozen in terror halfway to his truck. Izuku stood in the center of the crater he had created, breathing heavily. The lightning faded, leaving him in the eerie red glow of the emergency lights. He had won. He had passed the test. But he looked at the destruction around him, the shattered floor, the damaged walls, the terrified, beaten men, and he felt no triumph. He had tried to be a scalpel. But Fisk had forced him to become a sledgehammer. And he had a sickening feeling that was exactly what the Kingpin had wanted. He had shown his hand, revealed a measure of his true power. He stalked over to the trembling Owlsley, black whip tendrils snaking from his arms and pinning the man to the side of the truck. "The operation is over," Izuku growled. "And you're going to tell me everything about Fisk's plans?" Before Owlsley could answer, a blurry image in the distance caught Izuku's eye. Through the shattered loading dock doors he saw her. A woman with a camera, partially hidden behind a shipping container. The flash went off, a brilliant, star-like burst in the darkness. Karen Page. His cover was blown. The ghost was about to become a headline. He had won the battle, but as Claire's warning echoed in his ears, he knew he was now in more danger than ever before. The Kingpin's gaze was no longer one of curiosity. Now it would be one of pure, calculated malice. The aftermath of the warehouse battle was a ringing silence, punctuated by the groans of beaten men and the slow, steady drip of water from a severed pipe. Izuku stood amidst the wreckage he had created, the adrenaline from the fight leaving him with a hollow, vibrating emptiness. The emerald lightning of One for All had receded, leaving him feeling exposed in the eerie red glow of the emergency lights. He looked at the crater in the floor, at the terrified, babbling form of Leland Owlsley pinned by Black Whip, and at the distant figure of the reporter who had captured his impossible power on film. He hadn't just defeated a crew of mercenaries. He had announced himself to the entire city. The ghost was dead. A monster was born. He knew he couldn't stay. The police would be here in minutes, drawn by the sound of a localized earthquake. He left Owlsley and the others for them, a neatly wrapped, albeit battered, present. As he melted back into the shadows of the docks, the last thing he saw was Karen Page cautiously advancing into the scene, her reporter's instincts overriding any sense of self-preservation. He had given her the story of a lifetime, and in doing so, had painted a target on both their backs. He retreated to the sanctuary of Matt Murdock's safe house, his mind a chaotic whirlwind. He had the information from Owlsley, a flood of panicked confessions about Fisk's finances, his consolidation of the drug trade, and whispers of a larger, more sinister plan to cement his control over the city. But it was raw data, a mountain of criminal intelligence that he had no idea how to legally weaponize. Beating Fisk soldiers was one thing, dismantling his empire was another game entirely, one played in courtrooms and boardrooms, not just dark alleys. His fists, no matter how powerful, couldn't indict a man. He was sitting at the small, dusty table, Matt Murdock's journal open in front of him, when the realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He was trying to do this alone. It was a mistake he had made before, after the first war with Shigaraki. He had pushed away his friends, believing his solitary path would protect them, only to nearly destroy himself in the process. He had learned his lesson then, in the tearful, desperate intervention of his classmates. He would not make the same mistake again. Matt Murdock hadn't worked alone either. The journal was filled with mentions of them, the two pillars that had supported him in the light while he fought in the dark. Foggy Nelson, his best friend and law partner. Karen Page, the fearless investigator who became his confidant. They were the ghosts of this life, the living remnants of the world the old devil had tried to protect. They were the experts he needed. They understood the law, the city, and the enemy in a way he never could. But seeking them out was a risk. He would be dragging them back into the line of fire, a line they had every right to believe they had escaped. The memory of Nana Shimura's words echoed in his soul. *. You can't save anyone if you're all alone, sweetie. A hero needs friends. *. His decision was made. He couldn't approach them as the devil. That figure was a creature of violence and fear. He needed to reach out as a person. As a concerned citizen. He started with Franklin Foggy Nelson. From Matt's files he knew that the law firm of Nelson and Murdock was no more. Foggy had taken a position at Hogarth, Chow Benowitz, a high-powered, corporate firm a world away from the pro bono work they had once championed. Izuku found him leaving the gleaming, glass and steel tower of his new office late one evening. Foggy looked diminished. The jovial, slightly rumpled energy that Izuku had read about in Matt's journal was gone, replaced by a weary, professional polish. His suit was expensive, his tie was perfectly knotted, but his shoulders slumped with a weight that had nothing to do with his briefcase. He looked like a man haunted by a life he'd left behind. Izuku, dressed in his scavenged civilian clothes, intercepted him on the street corner, adopting the persona of a nervous, slightly overwhelmed young man. "Excuse me, Mr. Nelson?" Izuku began, his English still carrying a slight, unplaceable accent. Foggy looked up, his expression guarded, the automatic defense of a New York lawyer. "Do I know you?" "No, sir. My name is Izuku. I was hoping I could ask you about some legal advice." He made sure to look earnest and a little lost, a role that wasn't hard to play. Foggy's expression softened slightly. The ghost of the man who helped the helpless flickered in his eyes. "My firm's rates are considerable, kid. If it's pro bono you're after, I can give you the number for legal aid." He started to turn away. "It's about Wilson Fisk." Izuku said, the name dropping like a stone into a still pond. Foggy froze. His entire posture changed. The weary lawyer vanished, replaced by a man staring down the barrel of a gun. His eyes, which had been tired, were now sharp and full of a painful, familiar dread. "Walk away, kid," Foggy said, his voice low and deadly serious. "Right now. Turn around, go back to whatever life you had, and forget you ever said that name to me. Forget you ever saw me. Some doors, once you open them, can never be closed again." "I can't," Izuku insisted, his voice firm but not aggressive. "He's poisoning this city. A new drug, Inferno. People are dying." Foggy let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of humor. "People are always dying, kid. That's the one constant in Hell's Kitchen. Look, I've been down this road before. I know how it ends. It ends with friends in the hospital, it ends with good people in the ground, and it ends with the monster still sitting in his tower, untouchable. I'm out. I chose to live." The pain in his voice was palpable. Izuku saw the depth of his loss, the raw wound left by Matt Murdock's apparent death. He was a soldier who had survived a war and had no intention of fighting another. "The old devil of Hell's Kitchen, he never gave up," Izuku said softly, a calculated risk. Foggy's face contorted in a mask of anger and grief. "The devil is dead," he snarled, his voice cracking. "He died for nothing. Fisk is still here. The city is still bleeding. All that sacrifice, all that pain, it was for nothing. So take my advice. Run. Because whatever information you think you have, whatever righteous fire you think is burning in your gut, it's not enough. You'll just be more kindling for his fire." Foggy turned and walked away, his stride stiff, his back a wall of grief and regret. He didn't look back. Izuku stood on the corner, the city lights blurring around him. He had failed. He hadn't just been dismissed. He had clearly reopened a deep, festering wound. He had approached Foggy as a lawyer, but Foggy wasn't just a lawyer. He was a grieving friend. Izuku had used the wrong key for the lock. He wouldn't make the same mistake with Karen Page. He knew from her recent bylines that she was still a senior reporter at the New York Bulletin. Unlike Foggy, she hadn't run from the fight, she had dug in deeper. Her recent articles were sharp, investigative pieces, nibbling at the edges of Fisk's new empire, but lacking the hard evidence to land a knockout blow. She was still a soldier on the front lines, but her ammunition was running low. She didn't need a plea for help. She needed a weapon. He spent the rest of the night compiling his information. He used one of the library's computers to type up a detailed, anonymous report. He included everything he'd forced out of Owlsley: the chemical composition of Inferno, the distribution network, the name of the shell corporation VCI Shipping, and specific account numbers linked to Fisk's offshore operations. He was careful to omit any details that could point back to a superpowered individual, framing it as information from a terrified, high-level informant within Fisk's organization. It was a lie, but it was a believable one. The next evening, he watched the Asterisk Bulletin building from a rooftop across the street. He saw Karen leave, her posture as tense and determined as Foggy's had been defeated. She walked with a purpose, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings, a woman who knew the dangers of the world she lived in. She didn't go straight home. She went to a small, dimly lit Irish pub, a place called Josie's. It was a cop bar, a reporter's haunt, a place where information was traded over cheap whiskey. He slipped down into the alley beside the bar. He waited. About an hour later, Karen came out, her expression frustrated. She had clearly been chasing a lead that had gone cold. She stood under the faint glow of the bar's neon sign, checking her phone. This was his moment. He used smokescreen, not as a cloud, but as a single, thin wisp of vapor, just enough to momentarily obscure the alley's entrance. He moved with a speed that was little more than a blur to the human eye, placed a plain manila envelope on the passenger seat of her parked car through the slightly open window, and was back on the rooftop before the smoke had even fully dissipated. It was an impossible act, but one that would hopefully be dismissed as a trick of the light. He watched as Karen, sighing in frustration, walked to her car. He saw her stop, her hand on the door handle. She saw the envelope. Her entire body went rigid. She scanned the street, her eyes probing the shadows. He held his breath, making himself a smaller part of the rooftop's silhouette. After a tense moment, she quickly opened the door, snatched the envelope, and got in, locking the doors immediately. He watched as she tore it open, her face illuminated by the car's dome light. He saw her expression shift from suspicion to shock, then to a hungry, intense focus. Her eyes devoured the pages, her reporter's mind connecting the dots, seeing the shape of the story he had just handed her. It was the key. It was the hard evidence she had been missing. He had given her the ammunition she craved. He had planted the seed. Now he had to see if it would bear fruit. The next 48 hours were a study in contrasts. For Izuku, they were quiet. He laid low, patching up his new suit, studying Matt's files, and recovering from the fight. He felt like a coiled spring, waiting. For Karen Page, they were a hurricane. The envelope had galvanized her. It was a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart of her journalistic soul. She spent 2 days in a feverish, coffee-fueled haze, cross-referencing every piece of information in the anonymous tip. She spent hours in the city archives, pulling the incorporation papers for VCI shipping, confirming its links to other known Fisk-owned properties. She called a source in the DA, a man who owed her a favor, and read him the chemical breakdown of Inferno. She heard his sharp intake of breath, the grim confirmation that this was a new, weaponized narcotic. She followed the money, using a secure connection to trace the offshore account numbers. They were a labyrinth, but with the starting point provided by the tip, she found the path. A path that led directly back to a holding company solely owned by Wilson Fisk. She was building a bomb, piece by piece, and she was terrified. She felt the old, familiar fear, the ghost of Fisk's breath on her neck. But beneath the fear was a white-hot core of anger. Anger for Matt, for the city he had loved, and for the monster who was tightening his grip on it again. While Karen was buried in data, Foggy Nelson was buried in misery. His encounter with the strange Japanese kid had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. It had dredged up all the pain, the guilt, and the helplessness he had tried to bury under billable hours and expensive suits. He was in his office late one night, long after everyone else had gone home, staring at a picture on his desk. It was an old one of him, Matt, and Karen, taken in the early days of Nelson and Murdoch. They were young, broke, and impossibly happy. He was lost in the memory when his phone buzzed. It was Karen. "Foggy," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. "I need to see you. Now." "Josie's." She hung up before he could object. He found her in their old corner booth, a stack of papers and a laptop spread out before her. She looked wired, her eyes wide and bright. "Karen, what is this?" Foggy asked, sliding into the booth. "You know I can't. We can't do this anymore. Just look," she said, pushing a file towards him. "Someone dropped this on me. A source. Inside Fisk's organization." Foggy reluctantly picked up the pages. He started to read. His lawyer's mind, sharp despite his emotional turmoil, immediately began to process the information. He saw the corporate structures, the money laundering schemes, the direct, undeniable links between the street-level poison and the penthouse-level kingpin. It was the kind of case they had dreamed of when they started their firm. It was airtight. It was a silver bullet. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I told you a source." "Anonymous," she said. "Foggy, this is it. This is everything we need to put him away for good. No more shadows, no more vigilantes. We can do this the right way. With the law." Foggy stared at the papers, his heart a war zone of conflicting emotions. Part of him, the old Foggy, the one who believed in justice, was screaming with triumph. But the other part, the part that remembered cradling his best friend's bloody body, was screaming in terror. "It's a trap, Karen," he said, pushing the files away. "It has to be. Fisk doesn't have leaks. He cauterizes them. This is him baiting us, drawing us out into the open. Or maybe someone on the inside finally grew a conscience," she shot back, her voice rising. "Maybe not everyone is as terrified as you are. We have a chance here, Foggy, a real chance to finish what we started." What asterisk Matt started? The name hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. Matt is dead because of this. Foggy's voice was raw with pain. He died chasing this monster. And for what? For a few months of peace before Fisk crawled right back out of his hole? I won't let that happen to you, Karen. I won't bury you too. I'm not asking you to fight in the streets, Foggy, Karen said, her voice softening. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. I'm asking you to be a lawyer. Be the best damn lawyer I know. Look at this evidence. We can write an exposé that will tear his public image to shreds. You can file injunctions, you can get a warrant from the DA. We can use the system he's so good at manipulating and turn it against him. We can do it together. For him, Foggy looked from Karen's pleading eyes to the mountain of evidence on the table. He was tired of running. He was tired of being afraid. He looked at the old photo on his phone, at Matt's smiling face. What would Matt do? The answer was obvious. He would fight. A long, shuddering sigh escaped him. The wall of grief he had built around himself began to crack. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Okay, Karen. We do it your way. We do it the right way. From his rooftop perch across the street, Izuku watched them through a pair of binoculars he had salvaged. He couldn't hear their words, but he saw the tension, the argument, and finally, the handshake. He saw the two of them poring over the files he had given them, a team reforged in the crucible of their shared past. He had brought them back together. He had given them a weapon. But in doing so, he had also pushed them onto the chessboard, right into the Kingpin's line of sight. They were no longer ghosts. They were active players. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Fisk would not hesitate to sweep them from the board. His role had changed. He wasn't just a hunter anymore. He was a guardian. He was the unseen protector for the two people who were about to launch the first, crucial salvo in the war for Hell's Kitchen soul. He had started this, and he would be damned if he let them pay the price for it. The ghosts of Nelson and Murdoch were back in the fight, and their new, horned specter would be watching over them from the shadows.